Today we are going to discuss the intermuscular spaces. The intermuscular spaces are basically spaces between the muscles of the scapular region. So first I'll draw a diagram. I have drawn a diagram to show the scapula and the humerus, and I will discuss the muscles which are attached to these parts, and then I will discuss the spaces which are located between these muscles. This is the scapula, and in the original skeleton you can see the scapula is lying over here. This part is the glenoid cavity, and the glenoid cavity I have drawn is over here. The upper part of the glenoid cavity has a tubercle which is called the supraglenoid tubercle, and the lower part has an infraglenoid tubercle. Then comes the head of the humerus. This is the head of the humerus in my diagram, and this is the head of humerus in the skeleton. Then this structure here is the lesser tubercle of the humerus. The lesser tubercle in the skeleton is over here. This is the greater tubercle of humerus, and the greater tubercle is over here. Between these tubercles is the intertubercular sulcus, which has a medial lip and a lateral lip. So I have drawn the medial and lateral lips of the intertubercular sulcus. This is the medial lip and this is the lateral lip of the intertubercular sulcus. Now I will draw the muscles. This is the costal surface of the scapula, and the costal surface is occupied by a muscle which is called the subscapularis. Before the subscapularis, I'll draw the ligament which joins the humerus to the scapula. This is called the glenohumeral joint, and it has a capsule which is attached to the anatomical neck of humerus, and on the other side it is attached to the margins of the glenoid cavity. This is the capsule of the shoulder joint. Then comes a muscle which is called the triceps, long head of triceps, which comes from the infraglenoid tubercle, and it goes down and gets its attachment to the olecranon process of the ulna. So this is the long head of triceps. Then comes the subscapularis muscle, which occupies the subscapular fossa of the scapula, and it is attached to the lesser tubercle of humerus. This is the attachment of subscapularis. Then comes the teres minor. The teres minor is attached to the upper two-third of the lateral border of scapula, and it passes behind the humerus and gets attached to the lowest impression on the greater tubercle of humerus. So it passes behind the humerus and comes and gets its attachment on the lowest impression on the greater tubercle of humerus. Then we will draw the teres major muscle. The teres major muscle comes from the lower one-third of the lateral border of scapula and is attached to the medial lip of the bicipital groove. This is the attachment of the teres major muscle. Now you can appreciate three spaces which are enclosed between these muscles. One is this is called the quadrangular space. One is this is the upper triangular space, and one space is down here, and this is called the lower triangular space. Now we will discuss the boundaries of these spaces. The quadrangular space is bounded superiorly by the teres minor, the subscapularis, and the capsule of the shoulder joint. Inferiorly, the quadrangular space is bounded by the teres major muscle. Laterally, it is bounded by the surgical neck of humerus, and medially, it is bounded by the long head of triceps. Then comes the upper triangular space. The upper triangular space is bounded superiorly by the teres minor, inferiorly by the teres major, and laterally by the long head of triceps. Then comes the lower triangular space, which is bounded superiorly by the teres major, medially by the long head of triceps, and laterally by the shaft of humerus. In the first part of the lecture, we discussed the boundaries of the intermuscular spaces. Intermuscular spaces, basically, the significance of these spaces is that it serves as a conduit for the structures which come from the thorax or from the neck to enter the upper limb. So these are passages for those structures. Now let's discuss the contents of these intermuscular spaces. As you already know that the brachial plexus has three chords. One of them is the posterior chord. So I'll only draw the posterior chord. Here comes the posterior chord, which I've shown with the green color. As the posterior chord reaches the axilla, it divides into two final branches, the two terminal branches, which is the axillary nerve and the radial nerve. So when it passes through the quadrangular space, it gives off a branch called the axillary nerve, which enters the quadrangular space. So one of the contents of the quadrangular space is the axillary nerve. Then the rest of the posterior cord continues down as the radial nerve, and it enters the lower triangular space. From the lower triangular space, it passes behind the humerus through the radial groove and comes out on the lower lateral aspect of the humerus. So this is the pathway for radial nerve, and the dotted line shows the course of the radial nerve behind the humerus. So these are the contents of quadrangular space and the lower triangular space, the nerves which are related in which are passing through these spaces. Now I will draw the artery, which is the main artery of this region. This is the axillary artery. Here comes the axillary artery, which is lying over the posterior cord. As the axillary artery crosses the lower border of the teres major muscle, it is now called the brachial artery. So this is the axillary artery up till here, and from here downwards it is called the brachial artery. Axillary artery, the third part of axillary artery, gives off a branch which is called the posterior circumflex humeral artery. The posterior circumflex humeral artery, it accompanies the axillary nerve through the quadrangular space. So this is the branch which is called the posterior circumflex humeral artery. It accompanies the axillary nerve through the quadrangular space. Now this part of the artery is now called the brachial artery, as it has crossed the boundaries of the axilla and is now in the arm. So it is called the brachial artery, and it gives off a large branch which is called the profunda brachii artery. And the profunda brachii artery accompanies the radial nerve through the radial groove. So it will pass through the radial groove along with the radial nerve behind the humerus. This is the third part of axillary artery. It gives off a branch which lies deep to the scapula, and it is called the subscapular artery. It also takes part in the anastomosis around the scapula. The subscapular artery gives off a branch which is called the circumflex scapular artery. The circumflex scapular artery winds around the lateral border of the scapula, and as it has to wind around the lateral border, it has only one space, that is the upper triangular space through which it passes, and the content of upper triangular space is the circumflex scapular artery. This was all about the intermuscular spaces, and we will come up with some other lecture. I hope you liked the lecture. Please like and subscribe.